Hello and welcome to the Contrarians. I'm Peter Van Onselen. Thanks very much for your company. This is the only show on Sky or anywhere else where we truly involve you, the viewers, by reading out your tweets and emails. There's a lot at the federal and indeed at the international level for us to talk about with the panel shortly, but for my rant, I want to start by talking about a state issue out of Western Australia and not the James Price Point issue, because that has massive federal implications, and we'll talk about that shortly. I want to talk about a fellow called Rob Johnson. Now, I hear all of you collectively say, who the hell is that? He's the former police minister at the state level in Western Australia. He got dumped from the cabinet in the first term of Colin Barnett. Now, he must have been hopeless to get dumped from cabinet then, because they were a minority government where anything could have happened by removing somebody from the front bench. But he was so hopeless that Barnett decided to get rid of him even then. And then this individual is now very upset about what's happened. If you go online to various news sources, particularly out of Western Australia, with the local papers there, like Perth Now, which is the Sunday Times News Limited paper over there, you can see in full the kind of detail of the spray that Rob Johnson has given more recently about Colin Barnett. Now, this is a man who, when he was police minister, tried to institute a removal of reasonable suspicion when making a search of an individual, meaning that police, for no reason at all, or targeting people for all the wrong reasons, could decide to stop and search individuals. It was a disgraceful thing for a police minister to do. Indeed, it was a stupid thing, quite frankly, for the WA government to allow him to try to get through cabinet. And you won't hear me say this often, but thank God for the Nationals, because the only reason it didn't become law was because the Nationals blocked it in the upper house. This man tried to run for the speakership against the best interests and indeed the will of his party. He's the state equivalent of Peter Slipper, if you like, within the West Australian Parliament. There's a compliment. But this individual lost, unsurprisingly. He is a disgrace. He attacks his premier, and yet he still wants to be a member of the Liberal Party. He says he will refuse to resign. Well, quite frankly, the Liberals in Western Australia should sack this buffoon, because that's exactly what he is. We won't talk about this issue, but we will talk to the panel about a range of other issues. Ed Husic, welcome to the program. Hi. Julian Lisa, good to have you on board. Hi. Claire Harvey, great to have you on board as well. And Hugh, good to have you here as well, Hugh McDermott. Now, let's start with you, Hugh. Yep. Is there any shining light for the Labor Party at the moment, or is it all just still doom and gloom at the federal level?
Oh, there's plenty of shining light things going on. There's a lot of reforms going on. You know, the party's doing a lot of different things, or the government's doing a lot of different things. The work in China this week by the Prime Minister has been outstanding. You know, we're still our different levels of progress in the economy. You know, well, okay, you know, we've had the last couple of weeks has been hard. This week's been good. We're back on action again. We're back on track for to keep on going with the government.
Ed Husic, you know you guys are in trouble when I ask one of your fellow comrades of the left to take us through the good stuff and he fumbles away. Normally he's very eloquent.
You have a real good way of enticing guests to come back on, Peter. I really have to, kudos to you, really. I think the China announcement this week was very significant, particularly the establishment of the joint talks on an annual basis. I think was really one of the key foreign affairs announcements for quite some time.
Why is that? We don't even get to talk to the president. We only get the access once a year to the premier. If you're going to get the access to China, surely you want to talk to the big kahuna.
No, I think they're in senior leadership roles over there, and I think it does help us particularly. I mean, we've already had a very strong economic relationship, but China has a very constructive role to play in the region, as evidenced in particular what we're going through with North Korea at the moment.
But isn't it all about free trade? And at the end of the day, it's been 7, 8, 9 years, depending on when you start the negotiation point, for Australia to get a free trade agreement with China, and we still haven't got one. And there's been no progress towards that from what I can see.
Well, I think a number of things. Firstly, I don't think you could plausibly argue that the lack of a free trade agreement has hindered our ability to have a very strong economic relationship with China. There are difficult issues that need to be dealt with, not just by us, but by other countries, in particular on the services side within China, that a lot of other countries are trying to wrangle with this. This won't be a simple thing to achieve. But having said that, you know, no one could doubt for a moment the strength of the relationship on an economic level between our two nations.
All right, we'll come back to you in a moment, and I've got you here mostly to talk about the NBN, so we'll do that shortly. But Claire Harvey, can I just ask you on this China thing? I mean, what's your view about, everybody fawns over China. Why do we do that? They're not even a democracy. It's one thing for them to embrace capitalism, but it's a whole other thing for them to embrace democracy. They don't do that, but we're at a point now where there's almost no return on this because they've become so powerful.
Yeah, I think the question of China is incredibly problematic problematic for Australia in a way that is not often acknowledged. You know, I have a great problem with dealing with a country that's not just a democracy but is a totalitarian regime on a trade level and all sorts of things. But I think that regardless of what I think or what anyone else thinks about what China's doing in Tibet or anywhere else, they are in our region and we do have to deal with them. I think the North Korean situation sort of illustrates why we do need friends in that part of the world.
They're sort of a lesser of evils almost.
No, that's the thing, because they have influence over the countries which are more problematic, even more problematic in the region. You know, I think the Chinese are important in that regard.
Not that they're getting anywhere, though. I mean, at the end of the day, North Korea aren't listening to China either. Well, that's
so, you know, I mean,
low bar you've got there, by the way.
That's right. But I must say, I do think the Prime Minister's been very deft in turning what was looking like a foreign policy nightmare with China in terms of their reaction to the Obama's pivot to Asia. You know, his decision to bring troops to Australia, essentially, put simply, that was looking very unpleasant for a while there, but it's not now. You know, it seems to have been there's been a lot of work done behind the scenes, clearly, and the Prime Minister's done well there. Interestingly, for someone who said that foreign affairs was not her bag.
Well, she's actually been better at that than she has been at anything else. Julie and Lisa, do you give Julia Gillard credit that when it comes to the foreign stage, she's done a pretty damn bang-up job, certainly compared to how she's done domestically?
Well, she set the bar pretty low to begin with by saying she wasn't interested, as Claire's just said. Look, I think that what's happened in China this week...
She wasn't interested.
Well,
she made it clear that she was more interested in education.
In you know, doing things with kids in schools than she was with foreign policy. And frankly, as John Howard said this week, the China relationship has to be managed at a head of government level from Australia to China. And I think that this has been a good thing. I think, despite the problems that we may have with some things that the Chinese government does from time to time, you don't get any closer relationship with any nation unless you actually engage with them. And
that's why you reckon it's okay that John Howard let a dictator of a totalitarian regime address the elected representatives of the House in 2003?
I don't think that there was anything wrong with that, and I think
nothing wrong with that at all.
I think it was actually good because you got to see, the Chinese got to see how a democratic House worked. You remember the day before...
They've really taken up the cudgels on that, haven't they?
The day before, you'll remember, George Bush addressed the Parliament, and
you're saying that he's a totalitarian dictator?
And the Chinese leadership were worried that the Greens would interject on them again, and they wanted John Howard to move the address out of the House of Representatives so they could stop the interjection, and he said no.
But John Howard said, no, dictator as you may be, I'd like you to talk to our elected representatives.
Absolutely, and that the Greens would be in there and could interrupt him, and I think that's a good thing. That's part of the maturing of the relationship between the two countries.
Can we agree on something together that he really makes guests comfortable? Can we, I mean, is that something that you and I can...
I think we can agree.
I'm sorry that I don't think allowing the dictator of an authoritarian regime to speak to our democratically elected House is a bang-up thing. You know, I mean, silly me.
Are you high because of the soapbox, or...?
Do you think it's a good thing?
I hear you. So tell us, Peter, so are you pushing that we shouldn't have any engagement with China because they're not a democratic
I'm not saying that we need an iron curtain. I'm not saying that we need an iron curtain. But what I am saying, and you can read all about this in The Australian tomorrow, where I've gone into this in some depth.
So this is about marketing you, that's what it is. You've got a column which no one reads, so you want to try and market it.
Shame.
Everyone reads it.
Well, as I was saying, the reason that I take the view that
Tell us more, Peter.
that with China, there's an issue there. I don't know how you solve it from here, but it goes back to when they were originally allowed into the WTO and so forth. I mean, there were steps that could have been made to force democratisation on China at points in historical time.
You can't force democracy on a country.
Well, you can
people
cajole.
have to make a decision on it.
Yeah,
that's how democracy works.
No, but the way you get democracy there is by providing the kind of levers that a totalitarian
like
government...
George Bush did in Iraq.
No.
Is that what you're talking about?
Well, at the end of the day, Iraq's more of a democracy than China, but that's not the point.
There is something to be said, though. I actually think there's going to be this challenge for a lot of democracies or market economies where China, and we've previously talked about this, like China basically sets up a dam and tells people you leave.
You wish you had that power, do you?
No, but the point I was going to make is that in actual fact, you have to go through a whole engagement process with communities in democracies like ours or in the States that impacts on the lead times for things to happen, whereas China doesn't have that and can disrupt people's lives like that and then benefit and influence the world economy in a way that no one else can. So your point is absolutely correct, and there needs to be ways in which we can force that change, and there will be an incentive for countries to do that as well.
That's the interesting thing about it. I think there's been a bit of hand-wringing this week about the 45-year timetable for the very fast rail here. You know, that's such an incredibly long time, which it is, I accept, but that China managed to build, 4,000 kilometres of rail in, 21 days, and isn't that amazing? Yes, but they don't have an occupational health and safety regime, and that's what you can do when the union is state-controlled.
And people were impressed about Soviet Russia in the 1930s for their rapid industrialisation for exactly the same reason.
And the same as the United States in the 1800s with the use of slaves, same principles apply.
I think the other big issue with China is, of course, their currency. I mean, the continued control, the central control of their currency.
Well, that's something with the WTO that they could have done something about.
Well, indeed. I mean, there were obviously. I mean, I assume that there were discussions between the Prime Minister and the Chinese leadership on the currency issue. Particularly as the Financial Review today had a story with more and more people, more and more companies wanting to do deals in the renminbi. I think China has to come in and float their currency in order to help play its part in the global financial system.
Yeah. Hold that thought. We're going to take a commercial break. We're going to move on and discuss the NBN when we come back. You're watching Contrarians.